Mhm. Welcome, everybody. So nice to have you all here. My name's Kara Feldman-Hunt. I'm the director of the Osher Center for Integrative Health. And I'm so excited for this event tonight. We have Katherine Elmer, who is an herbalist and a health coach, and Whitney Smith, who is also an herbalist and a certified nurse midwife. I just asked you that question and I changed the answer. But they're going to share more about what we're going to do tonight. I just wanted to let you know a little bit about this series. So this is our Whole Health Connect series. It's a monthly event, monthly-ish. And it's really meant to bring people together like you all who might not otherwise meet. So integrative practitioners and students and community members, Osher affiliates often speak at this event. Both Katherine and Whitney are Osher affiliates. And we also invite people in who are from the community. So we hope you enjoy tonight. Join our mailing list because we have lots and lots of events coming up. Our next event is a Laura Mann lecture on February 23rd. It's Monday morning at 8 a.m. during Family Medicine Grand Rounds. And we have Sarah Ray coming from Humboldt, who's really talking about resiliency for climate anxiety. So we hope you will join us for that. And I'm going to stop there and turn it over to you two. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kara. And I also just want to honor Kara for her leadership and integrative health in what, like 15 years?
18
years. Yeah. I've known Kara for about 12 of those years. And it's been really wonderful to have so many champions of integrative health in the company. I've been at UVM for about 20 years now. Currently, I teach herbal medicine both at UVM and Vermont State University, and I'm practicing as a health and wellness coach at the Comprehensive Pain Program, which is an integrative health clinic.
Yeah, hi. Thank you all so much for being here. We're really excited. It's wonderful to see some familiar faces and lots of new faces. I am a certified nurse midwife. I've been in practice at the medical center for 10 years, and I joined the faculty in the College of Nursing and Health Sciences 3 years ago. So I teach the undergraduate and grad students all about pregnancy and birth and postpartum. And I also teach another class called Issues in Women's Health, which sort of brings all the socio-political stuff together. And Katherine and I really bonded over our love of plants. This topic. So we're really excited to be here. We invite all of you to grab some tea if you haven't yet. Take a moment to settle in. We'll get started.
Wonderful. Before we get into the content, I just want to name that this is actually a really special day astrologically. It's the new moon. It's the beginning of the lunar new year. There was an eclipse this morning. So it's a really potent time for new beginnings and challenging systems of authority, which I will unabashedly say we're going to be doing a bit today. Before we go into this, I also want to acknowledge that as herbalists and as folk healers, we want to acknowledge the original folk healers and herbalists of this land, the Abenaki people, who are the current and ancestral stewards of these lands. And this presentation is also dedicated to uplifting and rematriation of Indigenous people everywhere. So we'll jump into it. So before we get into some of the more intellectual stuff, we actually want to invite you into your bodies and into an embodied and sort of collective experience of what it is we're proposing to reintegrate. We're talking about reintegrating the feminine into institutional settings. What exactly does that mean beyond the word? And we're going to share a spoken word piece by Paula Liza Ghaffori in collaboration with a musician. Liza Ghaffori is one of the world's prominent Rumi scholars. So she's actually writing a poem about Rumi's poetry and sharing it in a really beautiful way. So as you hear this, we invite you to kind of close your eyes, ground in, really sort of feel into the meaning of the words that she's sharing. And we're also going to share a little bit of rose hydrosol. Rose is the highest naturally occurring frequency that exists on Earth. The scent of rose literally raises the vibes. And the idea is to meditate a little bit into softness. And you may feel some fear or resistance to the disarming that comes with relaxation. that's also welcome too. Kind of pay attention to that. You want to say anything about that? Is this possible?
Some words are like suitcases, so packed with meaning, backstory, connotations, they burst open when crossing the border between one language and another. Insights tumble out, and sometimes we discover that a state of being we haven't named has been named by another. The immigrant word, sometimes a revelation, an invitation. Take the word latif. 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 It means silky, delicate, soft, hair thin, sheer as gossamer. It means gentle, kind, open-hearted, receptive, and tender. Latif. Saffron threads jutting out of the purple-petaled crocus. Latif. A silky breeze on a summer night. Latif. A mother caressing the forehead of her newborn. Latif. A sincere apology and the sincere forgiveness that follows. Latif. Picture this. Water lapping the shore of the Tigris River on a moonlit night millennia ago. A woman sheds her clothes, steps into the water. Silvery fronds of date palms sway in the breeze. She lies back, floating in the moonlit river, at ease, translucent to the light of being, permeable to the sensual mystery of being everything here. Latif. Latif. What does it mean to become Latif? Asks a true dervish. Say a dervish in Damascus, a dervish in Konya, a dervish in Nesrapur, whirling in their 360-degree embrace of creation dance with one hand open to the sky and one to the earth, chanting, Ya Latif, Ya Latif. That word, one of the 99 names of God, they say, calling out, Ya Latif, Ya Latif. Chanting this word, they bring to mind not just the meaning, not just the gentle, delicate, kind, silky attribute of the divine, but the process of becoming it, becoming Latif in daily life. To be Latif is to shed our ego's defensive armor, is to drop the insistence on me versus you versus you versus me versus you versus me versus you. Is to dismantle the walls that separate us, is to soften, to open, to allow for an intimate exchange that makes life worth living for many of us. شعر گشتم در لطافت, said the Persian mystic and sage Jalaluddin Muhammad ibn Hussein Balkhi, aka Mulana, aka Mevlana, aka Rumi. شعر گشتم, I became hair thin, he said. What of me became hair thin? My defenses, my armor thinned to a silken scrim. I sifted the soil that gives vision to the blind. In another poem, he says, they say there's a door between one heart and another. How can there be a door where no wall remains? That place where no wall remains is Latif. He says, خویش را چون خار دیدم سوی گل بگریختم خویش را چون سرکه دیدم در شکر آمیختم کاسه پر زهر بودم دیده پر درد بودم سوی تریاق آمدم دست در عیسی زدم. He says, I saw myself sharp as a thorn. I fled to the softness of petals. I saw myself sour as vinegar. I mixed myself with sugar. An aching eye, seeing through pain, a stewing pot of poison. I was both, reaching for the antidote. I touched compassion. I touched mercy. He literally says, I touched Jesus. But let's put aside 750 years of baggage, misunderstanding, and war attached to this name and get to the point of what Jesus embodied: compassion, mercy, reaching for the antidote. I touched compassion. I touched mercy. In the dirt on the path of love, I found the medicine that ensouls sight. My armor thinned to a silken scrim. I sifted the soil that gives vision to the blind. I sifted the soil that gives vision to the blind. Latif, Latif, Latif. Consider the trees. Where's the site of exchange that keeps the trees alive? We see their thick, hard trunks surging skyward. But where is the site of exchange that enables them to grow? Not in the woody, hard, impenetrable trunk, but in the most delicate places. The tiny root hairs, the tiny pores on the underside of the leaves. Latif, Latif, what strength these vulnerable places enable. And I know it's hard, being two-legged mammals walking the earth with no fur, needing cover, needing shelter, needing so much. And I know hurt people are hurting people at every level of society, wreaking havoc with no remorse. So it is hard to be soft, hard to walk the world latif. We persist. Let us persist. Open to this mystery. What can we do? What can we do but honor, value, protect, allow this life-giving, precious state of being as we can, and see what happens.
Your eyes gently closed over the soft gaze. And really anchor this feeling in your body. What does latif, gentleness, softness feel like in your body? Where do you feel it? How does it nurture? How does it nourish you? Take a moment to remember a time when you felt this. Maybe it was the last time you felt it, or maybe it was a particularly potent time that you felt this sort of gentle, soft, disarmed feeling in your body. And savor it for a moment. Take another breath, come back into the room. Take a look around and reorient. Welcome. I'm going to do a little poll with a show of hands. So where were you when you felt that feeling of latif? Like where, when you were sort of having that memory? How many of you were at home when you felt it? How many of you were at work? How many of you were in nature? How many of you, this is like for healthcare providers, how many of you were with a patient? What about with a colleague? There's only one person at work. Thank you. So we did this exercise at a conference in October with healthcare providers, and only one person was with a patient when they felt this feeling. And only one person was at work here at the university when they felt this. And so we're here to ask the question about the power of gentleness in professional spaces, and especially in medicine, because we believe that it needs to be brought back, and it needs to be celebrated and encouraged and supported more, not only, but also because, let's try to quote Liza Gafford, she said, "What strength do these gentle places provide? There's strength in gentle places." So we're going to describe a little bit our journey with this, and then give you a chance to reflect for yourselves on how to bring this more back into your work.
So these are our objectives for our time together. We hope that when we part ways this evening, you'll be able to describe the characteristics, the power of the divine feminine, and how they contribute to more inclusive and equitable healthcare or professional spaces. Summarize historical events that have led to delegitimizing and excluding characteristics of the divine feminine and BIPOC sovereignty in healthcare settings. And reflect on ways you might uplift and reintegrate the divine feminine qualities in your personal and professional lives, and create brave spaces for your patients and colleagues. This is how we're going to spend our time together. So Katherine and I will give you a brief little more intro to our professional lives, and then we'll go through the historical foundations. for suppressing the feminine in healthcare. We'll have some time for a small group discussion and reflection, and then closing and grounding. Did everyone receive the handout that has the reflective practices? There's some extra copies.
There are more on the corner.
I do have one more.
Need more?
Sure, thanks.
Which one? We'll print one.
I just wanted to really emphasize this quote. This is from Dr. Moonwise. She's a renowned herbalist. She says, and midwife, yes, and physician. When I talk about the sacred feminine, a return to it, an embracing of it, a rise of it. It's really to say that it's time we begin to find our way to bring this back into balance, to bring this masculine and feminine back into balance. These energies live within all people. They're within all of us.
That was really important for us to emphasize. I know I see a lot of folks with uteruses that probably identify as female in the audience today, but this is not just for women. Although I think the burden of the oppression of the feminine has been borne
and they said that was too
by folks with female bodies.
Put shoes off.
Mute that person. But it's for everybody. Like everyone suffers in a culture that's out of balance. So a little bit about my journey, and it really starts with sort of coming into the world as a very feminine child. I loved wearing dresses. I loved dressing up and being photographed. I was making my own earrings at the age of 6 and 7 because my mom refused to have my ears pierced. The first earrings I ever made were roses that I stuck to my ears with tape. And my mom was really bewildered by this behavior because I was growing up in the middle of nowhere in an off-the-grid home in the mountains of Bolton, Vermont. And she would joke with her friends about maybe needing to New York City so I could pursue a career in fashion. So this sort of like loving beauty, loving showing that beauty has been a part of my childhood. And when I was 7, I had kind of a strange health experience where a blood test was questionable enough that the doctors thought I might have leukemia. And without really looking into it, they put me through a bone marrow biopsy at the age of 7. My parents described being really confused and scared and just going with what the doctors recommended. And my memory of it is being separated from my parents, experiencing a lot of pain. I was conscious while this procedure was happening. They were removing bone marrow from my hip. And I didn't really understand until many years later, kind of going back and reintegrating, I stopped being this sort of feminine, lighthearted child in a lot of ways. It was like a very clear point where I stopped doing that. And I had another formative experience around femininity, kind of middle school and early high school. I was receiving a lot of unwanted attention from male teachers. It was very scary and kind of the typical culture of victim blaming and shaming. I thought it was my fault. So I changed how I dressed. I really tried not to show up as feminine to try and avoid that kind of attention. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s, I was actually supporting a friend through a really difficult time where her 12-year-old daughter tried to take her own life shortly after she got her first moon blood. And I was having my own kind of reaction to that and kind of realizing that I hadn't chosen something as drastic, but right around that time in my adolescence, when I started masculinizing in order to protect myself, there was this point where I didn't want to move forward with the feminine integrated in me, and so I buried it. So it wasn't until my 30s that I started realizing how much I missed and that I wanted to kind of bring that back. And my academic path was always deeply focused on a connection to nature, but I was also fascinated with healing in the human body. So I took all the pre-med classes, but ended up majoring in ecology. You could say, if I look back at my academic career, that I was doing the perfect training to be an herbalist. But of course, herbalism is not offered as a course of study at major institutions for reasons that will be very clear at the end of this presentation. And I had another really powerful experience at my first women's herbal conference where there was a moment of silence offered for victims of genocide. So I was kind of preparing myself to sit with the people of Palestine and sit with the people of Congo and Sudan, like modern genocide. And the first people that they mentioned were the wise women of Europe. And I had no intellectual understanding really of what that meant, except from like movies and myths, what many of us have. I'm not someone who experiences emotion easily in public. I wasn't with anybody I knew. I started sobbing, like the kind where my body was just shaking. So I had this sort of, bout of grief that prompted me to get really curious and start looking into like, what is this grief about? Why is this in my body? And I'm going to share a piece of writing from 2020. I'll pass it over to Whitney to share. Those of us who are blood and spirit descendants of Europe's wise women are destined not to fit into colonized modern society. We will be misunderstood in a culture that has avoided or been protected from confronting the truths of the execution of wise women, folk healers, and the culture they represented. History matters. Her stories, the collective feminine, matters. It whispers in our ear when we see a person who is boldly and unapologetically feminine. It whispers, don't trust her or them. She, they are a threat to the ordered and predictable society we rely on for survival. But what if we chose thriving over surviving? We cannot thrive unless we have the courage to dance barefoot on the earth with the wild woman, femme, witch. It is time to welcome her, them into our communities and psyches because she lives inside all of us, regardless of gender or ancestry. It was just buried deeper, under more layers of shame, and those of us whose blood ancestors are victims of the Roman imperialism that is the birth trauma of the European continent. The other piece I wanted to add is that most of my experiences of misogyny in my adult life have been from other women, and especially the ways that my mother and my maternal grandmother tried to keep me safe by criticizing aspects of my femininity. And I think that's important to me. Thank you.
Katherine. So just to share a little bit of my journey with the feminine. I was pretending to catch babies as a 4-year-old. I'm the youngest of 4. I have a twin sister, so I didn't grow up around pregnancy. It was truly just with me from the start. And I recognized as a young child that this was a little different. And I learned about midwives from a friend's mom who was having her 4th home birth. I grew up in suburban Connecticut. This was not a common thing. And there was a lot of chatter about, the woo-woo mom having the baby in the tub in the living room, but I was like a magnet to her. And so she taught me about midwives, and I thought, that's it. That's what I'm supposed to be when I'm 7. Around that same time, I was also fascinated by this archetype of the witch. I played witches all the time. My twin sister and I played with another set of twins, which in hindsight is pretty magical. We did a lot of outside brewing on a outdoor tin stove and all kinds of potion making, and those are like some of my most powerful and beloved childhood memories. In my suburban town, it's a historic town, so there we took a field trip in elementary school to the town hall, and behind the town hall was what used to be a pond, and we were told this is where they drowned witches during the witch trials in our town. And I also learned around that time that, which we'll talk more about tonight, that many of the wise women that were accused of witchcraft were midwives. So we'll talk more about that. So making this connection for me, like this is maybe interesting, kind of mystical territory, combining those two things. I also have another very formative memory as a young person, similar to Katherine, and once the male gaze became a part of my life, realizing that the feminine was not always safe to fully embody. And I'm sure that's not an uncommon experience for many people. So learning how to tone that down. And the last thing I'll share, I am constantly trying to figure out how to bring this magic, bring the feminine, bring my inner witch into a very masculine healthcare system that I work within. And even today, hearing from a student who said, I just appreciate the openness you create in our class space for some reflection. To me, that is, again, receptive and listening. So I like to say the older I get, the witchier I get. It's better. It's saging, not aging. And I had the last little funny thing I'll share. A dear friend of mine, I'll never forget, her child was probably 3 or 4, sitting on my lap at a party. Her face was very close to mine and she was just sort of taking me in. And she said, remember when Siren called you a witch? And at the time, Siren was another friend's child who was like 9 or 10 months old, so clearly not verbal. So I had this, it felt very seen by a child. So that is my journey. And so we will just kind of keep unfolding into our reflections.
Sure. I also wanted to, I don't know if you saw it out there, but there are some kind of brown paper bags of tea bags. And this is really beautiful tea that Whitney brought. So if you haven't made yourself a cup of tea, feel free to do that. And also, I think there's enough.
Yes, we have extra bags, so we can, there's some back there, you can fill more before you go.
And before we go into this next piece, I just want to remind you of that feeling of gentleness and softness. Some of what we're going to be sharing in the history might be uncomfortable in your bodies. So if you need to, move, take care of yourself. I'm also bringing like an even deeper rose medicine. We shared the hydrosol, which is the essential oil and water. This is a fresh rose petal and glycerin. So it's like sweet rose. There's no side effects or interactions with medication with this. And the invitation is to take this internally. And I'm going to model how to take tinctures and extracts from a dropper bottle without sharing derms too much. So instead of trying to put it in your mouth, but somebody's going to actually touch it to their teeth or their lips, just put a drop or two right in this little hollow created between your thumb and forefinger, and then lick that off. And let's pass it around with the lid loose, so grab it from the bottom. Yeah. And
no pressure. Yes,
optional. Just to support you and kind of integrating. The heart is so wise in its ability to integrate all kinds of emotions, even the more challenging. So I'm going to start with a familiar figure, especially for those of us who have studied medicine or science. This is Sir Francis Bacon. I learned about him often because I was so fascinated in science, and he's considered kind of the forefather of the modern scientific method, which is very foundational, not only in science, but also in medicine. And I think an important shadow side of Francis Bacon, actually, before I share all the text, what I learned more recently about Francis Bacon is that he also was very active serving on Inquisition panels that tried and sentenced witches. And his adult life spanned 40 years as a member of the British Parliament in sort of the late 1500s, early 1600s. And in 1604, the British Parliament passed the death penalty for witches, even in absence of any evidence of damage inflicted on perpetrators. So just being accused of being a witch was enough to get someone executed. And feminist Carolyn Merton, another infamous thing attributed to Sir Francis Bacon is that he really stood behind the transformation of the earth from being a nurturing mother and the womb of life into a source of secrets to be extracted for economic advance. So this is actually an excerpt from Sir Francis Bacon's writings, saying that science should, as it were, torture nature's secrets out of her. The empire of man should penetrate and dominate the womb of nature, hound nature in her wanderings, in order to predictably drive her afterwards to the same place again. And neither ought a man to make scruple of entering and penetrating into these holes and corners when the truth is his whole object. so troubling language. And sort of that is really the roots of science that is used all the time in sort of modern decision making and modern healthcare. One of my favorite mentors, Fern Lickfield, who's a local druid, talks about how important it is to investigate the roots, investigate the dark places in your life, because if they are rotten, you want to know where there's rotten places in your foundation. So that's kind of what comes up for me here. And I'm going to share a quote from a student of mine, because I've been teaching about the history of the burning times in my herbalism classes for about the last 6 years. And this is from a cis white male student's final paper. I was very struck by learning about the burning times. I grew up near Salem, which is famous for witch trials. However, I had never learned about the 6 to 9 million women that were killed in Europe in the burning times. I can't believe that a genocide at the same scale as the Holocaust is so scarcely talked about. I mentioned this history to my parents, and neither of them have heard about it. I've mentioned it to friends, coworkers, anyone who will listen, and none of them have heard of the burning times. This is a horrible history of the male patriarchy seizing power of medical care, wiping out so much ancestral knowledge of herbal medicine, of wellness sovereignty. This history is largely ignored, but it must be acknowledged. It is an outrage that it is not taught at schools. So we're here to share a brief history, really covering about 5,000 years of history in 15 minutes. So we are sharing resources on the back of your handout if you want to do reading. And I also want to encourage you to explore some historical fiction and nonfiction sources. That was one of the first places where I got little seeds of truths that kind of led me to some of the truths that were in. So really, this is a case of historical erasure that impacts the way we view femininity, both in individuals and collectively. And like I said, it's unpacking, actually more than 2,000 years back to before pre-Roman Inquisition and 2,000 years ago or 2,026 years ago. And history is really written and controlled by the winners, and they shape the criteria for belonging and who matters in society. So some really important influences are Judeo-Christian thought, Roman colonialism. The doctrine of discovery is a document that I also teach in my classes, which was published in just after Christopher Columbus's voyage. So I think it's 1493, basically giving permission to explorers to claim lands that were held by non-Christian people, saying that people who are not Christian are only animals, and so therefore they can't have a land. And this document has been written into US law and used in United States court cases against Indigenous people as recently as 2007. So still alive in our more recent history. Medicine, the current model of medicine has roots in Greco-Roman, so colonial styles of medicine, and then of course science. And then with that later came the systemic erasure of herbalists and midwives, because a lot of their knowledge had linkages to those pre-Christian and pre-colonial ways of knowing. I wanted to briefly add the thing. Jason Hirsch, who is a colleague at the St. Mike's College as a medical anthropologist, was doing research about what some of the reasons that the American Medical Association hasn't honored herbalism. At the time of the founding of the American Medical Association, herbalism schools or any schools that were teaching herbalism were not allowed to be accredited. And herbalists and spouses of herbalists were also not able to get a medical license. So there has been very systemic erasure and suppression of that knowledge, particularly when we see science as the only valid medical way of knowing, it ends up delegitimizing these folk sources of knowledge and non-academic knowledge, because not all healers can afford to go to medical school, and some of them might choose not to go to medical school because they don't want to abandon this knowledge that they have.
And yeah, just to speak, we'll talk more about the systemic erasure of midwives in the US, but just to share a little from a really great book called Witches, Midwives, and Nurses. So midwives and herbalists were the folks who, the healers who carried all of the knowledge to allow women to have reproductive autonomy and sovereignty. And they carried information about things that seemed very mystical, that were beyond control of God and the church, like menstruation and labor and birth and postpartum, menopause, abortion. And they aided women in maintaining their reproductive sovereignty. So this knowledge was passed from woman to woman, was separate from any large universities or institutions, and really threatened the emerging medical and religious authority. So the word witch really became a stand-in for any woman who had healing wisdom and ability. Midwives were especially targeted because they attended births without male oversight. So it was a realm in which the patriarchy, in which men really had no control. And they witnessed female sexuality and female reproduction. And they held a lot of authority during these moments of where the veil is thin. So when life is entering and when life is leaving. So witch hunts began in the burning times, which we'll talk about. And, you know, we also helped, it also led to the severing of American midwifery. So we'll talk about that in a future slide.
So here's where we take you a little bit too quickly through 5,000 years of history. So what came before Christianity and Judeo-Christian thought? You know, sort of the dawn of Christianity is often credited to 0 AD, so 2026 years ago. Before Christianity, the major people were practicing matriarchal earth-based traditions, and there was lots of imagery of pagan earth goddesses consorting with snakes and apple trees as the tree of life. So what does that remind you of? When I started learning about this, it was like in my 30s, this huge realization and chills throughout my body. The story of Genesis in the Bible is not a creation myth, it's propaganda against the religion and traditions that existed before. And again, those prescriptions about who belongs, what type of behavior is allowed. So here, snake goddesses from Minoa and Crete, also lots of labyrinths in Minoan Crete, and holding snakes, because snakes were seen as, because their bellies run along the ground, they were thought to have the closest connection to the secrets of the earth, and huge divine divination and oracular powers. This image of Earth Mother with snake and a tree comes from a book in a cathedral in Belgium. I must not have burned that one. And then Lughnasadh, this is an image of the Celtic tree of life, which is an apple tree, and the Celtic calendar carries some of these images forward, despite colonization. I think Ireland is an amazing example of resisting colonization in many ways. So what came before Christianity? These pagan earth goddesses. What came before Roman imperial colonialism in Europe? Agrarian societies, earth-based societies. It was a new idea that you could use brute force to conquer as a way to survive on the land. Prior to that, you needed to live into the earth, and you needed to work with the rhythms of the earth in order to survive and perhaps thrive. There was also a practice of gender equity. Women and men could be warriors, women and men could be dreamers and healers, communal living, and then this spirituality connected to the earth, because their survival and their joy and beauty was so base. And then before Greek and Roman medicine in Europe and in America, a lot of medicine was practiced by folk healers, predominantly women, midwives, herb wives, and oracles. So here's an image on the right of Celtic wise women. There's a network of wells that still exists largely throughout the Celtic Isles. And there was often a wise woman or oracle that would sit with the waters and, you know, offer her oracular powers. It was also guarded by, or I guess overseen by, a maiden who would kind of guide people down to see the oracle. And one of the first things that the Roman colonizers did was rape the well maidens and destroy these wells because they saw how important it was to the identity and spirituality of the indigenous people of the Celtic Isles. This is another image from a book in a German cathedral. Earth nurses a snake at her breast, holding a cornucopia of mugwort. So much of these images of the earth and its connection to herb lore. Mugwort has lots of beautiful history. The quick story I'll share is that it's called mugwort because it was the favorite beer bittering herb for a long time in Europe. So a mug of wort, which is a plant. It was the Protestant church that came forward to encourage everyone to use plants instead. The healing properties of mugwort is that they help you connect to the divine within. It's a lot about sovereignty. That felt like a threat to a church that wanted people to come within their walls to access the divine. And hops is quite sedating, and it's easier to control a population that's more sedate.
Mugwort is also said to aid in vivid dreaming. So
yes, part of connection to the divine. I'm going to read a piece from a 7th century Roman chemist who was traveling through Gaelic Ireland and talking about the healers that he witnessed there. He says, "For I remember the chieftains of Ireland used to give a piece of land to a healer who lived with them. Not one who came back trained from the universities, but one who could really make sick people well. Each such healer has a book crammed with specific remedies bequeathed to him by his forefathers. Accordingly, he who inherits the book inherits also the piece of land. The book describes the symptoms and ailments and the country remedies used for each, and the people of Ireland are cured more successfully when ill and have generally far more than the people of Italy." The other thing that stands out to me about this passage, 7th century, so we're already into the burning times and kind of the suppression of healers. He's using he, him pronouns here. And one of the things I noticed in my herbalism training is that many of the post-colonial herbalists in the United States, they're called the eclectics, were men. There was kind of a shift to the people who felt safe practicing healing with herbal medicine because of the gendered aspect of the persecution. And I think this either reflects that or this Roman person couldn't conceive of the fact that someone with she, her pronouns would be carrying this knowledge. So you probably know where we're going with what happened to Europe's wise women, and I'll invite you to take a breath. So the burning times in Europe, and this is from Silvia Federici, who I consider to be one of the most prominent scholars, really well-researched work, and quite revolutionary as a historian in this area. She writes, "For more than 2 centuries in several European countries, hundreds of thousands of women were tried, tortured, burned alive, or hanged, accused of having sold body and soul to the devil, and by magical means, scores of children, sucked their blood, made potions with their flesh, caused the death of their neighbors, destroyed cattle and crops, raised storms, and performed many other abominations." Abominations. It's a tough word to say. So the history of the burning times and kind of what led up to the most intense part of the burning times was this idea of witchcraft being a Roman crime. So it was a post-colonial crime. It didn't exist as something that was, unusual or dangerous prior to Roman colonization. Imperial Roman law forbade maleficia or sorcery, and burning at the stake is a characteristic Roman punishment. And Max Dashu is another American scholar who's written about it, and I encourage you to check out her books if you're interested in this. And she talks about this patchy evidence. A lot of historians refer to this as the lost centuries of witch persecution. There's very few written records that survive from this period, and there's actually some evidence in certain places like Belgium where the records were deliberately destroyed, which gets into the issue of history being based on the written word, what happens when those in power do not want the memory to exist? The few historical records that are available talk about the criminals as sage, which is another word for wise woman, not harmful sorcerers. And women weren't the only gender persecuted, but predominantly they were women. And if you see sort of later, and as it starts to get integrated into the culture, there's an Anglo-Saxon prediction that a girl born on the 5th day of the moon will die worst, for she will be a witch and an enchantress with herbs. So this is where you start to see, as it goes on for centuries, it starts to become part of the culture, this fear of girls and women who are drawn to living in this way, healing. And then the escalation, before 800 AD, the main punishment for pagans and witches and women who performed abortions was flogging, enslavement, and fines. It was Charlemagne in 800 AD that ordered death as a penalty. And this was for observing pagan rites. So this is as simple as offering, the language is those who sacrifice to the devil should be killed. Sacrificing to the devil might be offering a bundle of herbs under your favorite tree or singing to the river at sunrise. So these are considered pagan rites that are punishable by death after 800 AD. Drowning or other killing with the power of the elements was a popular method. And by the 11th century in continental Europe, mobs of armed men were executing women as this without trial. So it escalated to a point where there was really no justice in their process.
So this is another quote I'll share with you from Sylvia Federici as well as Barbara Walker. Many women before 1514 were accused and tried for witchcraft were old and poor. Old women were also those in the community most likely to resist the destruction of communal relations caused by the spread of capitalist relations. They were the ones who embodied the community's knowledge and memory. The witch hunt turned the image of the old woman upside down. Traditionally considered a wise woman, she became a symbol of sterility and hostility to life. And Barbara Walker says, female elders once held the political power among the clans, but patriarchal religion and law gradually took it away from them and called them witches in order to dispose of them. It's also really important, I think, here to note and remember that the life expectancy was much younger then than it is now. So it was not always common to see older people, elders. And so that alone made many older women stand out and led to this ageism and then accusations of witchcraft.
And older women who were healers often didn't need to be married because marriage was often something that was necessary as a way to support themselves financially. So these were women who were living alone because they could. They had other ways of living and supporting themselves, and that started to be seen as a reason to fear them or see them as suspicious for that choice. So the 17th century is considered the witch craze, and this was when Carolina, which was a legal code enacted by Charles V, established that witchcraft would be punished by death. Protestant England, so this is bringing us back to Francis Bacon time. This persecution was legalized by 3 acts of parliament, the last one in 1604 introducing the death penalty, even without evidence of damage inflicted on persons or things. This is written into law. There doesn't need to be clear justice or evidence, just purely the accusation of the witch. And I think a lot of the mistrust that started to exist between women and the isolation of women was intentional and really born out of this place where the way you save yourself is to accuse another woman, and what that has done to the sisterhood, which is really important to acknowledge. And after 1550, laws and ordinances making witchcraft a capital crime and inciting the population to denounce suspected witches were also passed in Scotland, Switzerland, France, and the Spanish Netherlands. And they were reissued in subsequent years to expand the number of those who could be executed and made witchcraft as such rather than the damages presumably provoked by it, the major crime. So just witchcraft was enough. And then bringing us to Turtle Island and our shores over here in Salem, Massachusetts, that's the most well known. And this happened in 1692 and 1693. More than 200 people were accused of practicing witchcraft, 20 were executed. And the colony has since admitted that the trials were a mistake and supposedly compensated the families. But how do you compensate for something like that? And as Whitney referenced with her story of the pond in her town for drowning witches, it's likely that these were happening more widespread than Salem, and I didn't learn about any of this. So what's the impact of this in society? What's the impact in medicine? We know that many of the accusers of witches and midwives were male doctors who felt threatened by the knowledge that they carried, even though they couldn't attend schools. And again, from Sylvia Federici, with the persecution of the folk healer, women were expropriated from a patrimony of empirical knowledge regarding herbs and healing remedies that they had accumulated and transmitted from generation to generation. Its loss paving the way for a new form of enclosure. This was the rise of professional medicine, which erected in front of the, quote, lower classes a wall of unchallengeable scientific knowledge, unaffordable and alien, despite its curative pretenses. So by the 18th century, many historians say that the witch craze kind of tapered out. However, we really feel it's important to talk about this history and talk about the witch burnings today. And the next slides are sort of talking about modern manifestations, not only in how women are treated and how medicine is practiced, but also its impact on Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and lack of acceptance of these nature-based practices.
So why does it matter? Why does this history matter? Why are we talking about it now? The modern day witch hunt in the United States was really against midwifery, and specifically Black granny midwives. So early in the 18th century, most of the births attended in the US were attended by granny midwives, and this was a term of great honor to be a granny midwife. Traditionally, granny midwives, the term was used in the southern US, and these were enslaved women who had carried the tradition of midwifery with them from Africa to the continental US, and were serving not only other enslaved women, but also other rural women, BIPOC women, white women, with very little protection for themselves. And in they were the trusted healers. They had ancestral knowledge, they had medical wisdom, and even when they were enslaved, they actually had a lot of autonomy to leave certain locations and go tend to folks in the community. And they were really trusted healers. They built systems of care where there were none. So there was no other access to healthcare for most people assigned female at birth for women. Just to point out two of the most renowned and beloved granny midwives from the US. This is Miss Mary Coley. If you're interested, there's a film in the Library of Congress you can stream online called All My Babies. And this is Maud Claudette. And Maud Claudette is seen here. She started her very own clinic, and she was serving families in the rural South with a 400-mile radius. She was the only healthcare provider. So rich, rich knowledge. When in the 1800s, we had this rise of what we now call obstetrics. So university trained white male physicians really wanted, they saw midwives with this knowledge as competition. And so they began to paint, specifically because so many of the midwives were granny midwives, they started to paint midwives as dirty, as uneducated, as using sorcery. So it was a systemic, targeted attack on midwifery in the US. And many white male obstetricians started to really sell the idea of using an obstetrician as a sign of affluence, as a sign of ability to get the best possible care and the best possible technology. as maternal mortality rates declined, as more birth moved into hospitals, which was really due to increased sanitation and new technology, not the people providing the care, by the way. White male obstetricians started to question midwifery and then really portray granny midwives in this terrible light and blame granny midwives and unlicensed midwives for maternal mortality rates. Actually, in 1921, a physician named Dr. Felix Underwood, who was the director of the Bureau of Child Hygiene for Mississippi, said, "What could be a more pitiable picture than that of a prospective mother housed in an unsanitary home, attended in this critical period by a filthy and ignorant and not far removed from the jungles laden with atmosphere of weird superstition and voodooism." So overt racism, overt patriarchy, and we see this intersection. So the eradication of midwifery was really rooted in that. And then we had laws passed in the early 1900s, the Shepherd-Towner Maternity and Infancy Protection Act, which mandated that midwives obtain licensure, which seems, okay, this could be a good thing, right? But many people did not have access. It wasn't easy to obtain, either financially or based on their location. And so we slowly started to see midwifery pushed out of the community and into hospitals. And so this wasn't progress, this was professional consolidation. And it mirrors the earlier witch hunt logic, which is discredit, regulate, replace. It's the same idea. This matters now because it has contributed directly to the abysmal disparity we see in maternal care now, which is Black mortality. So BIPOC women are 3 to 4 times as likely to have poor pregnancy outcomes and even lose their lives in pregnancy and postpartum. And we can see this connection because midwifery improves outcomes. This is data driven, we know this for sure. But over time in the US, as we have accused, a similar model, as we've accused midwives, the community healers, the wise women serving the people of their community and having this knowledge. And we have fewer and fewer midwives of color taking care of people. We see this growing disparity. So the suppression of midwives and women healers was not about safety. It's about control over women's bodies, labor. I also wanted to just highlight, I'm not sure if you all know about this history, but the mothers of gynecology. So Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, who are seen up here. And this middle picture is a picture of Anarcha. And these women were 3 enslaved women who had to endure repeated, incredibly invasive and painful procedures at the hands of who is called John Marion Sims, who's known as the father of obstetrics. And he was known for a long time for pioneering all of these huge advancements in surgical procedures, gynecologic procedures, and he operated without consent on these women for years. And that's how we have a lot of the obstetric procedures we have now. There's forceps named after him that are still used. So there's been a big push to now say, okay, he's called the father of obstetrics. Now, these are the mothers of gynecology because thanks to them and their unfortunate abuse, we are gaining medical knowledge. So just to name them. And their names were really erased from history. Many people have, even those of us who have been caring for folks through pregnancy and providing gynecologic care for all of our careers, don't know about these women.
We also see, Sylvia Federici says, we cannot let the history of the witches be buried in silence unless we want their destiny to be repeated. We see it particularly with women of color in politics, AOC being accused of social media, leading a coven of witches, casting spells on President Trump, so like fear. And this little screenshot comes from Blaze Media, which is a far right media source. In 2024, so 2 years ago, the dark arts have a new name, Witchcore, and it's lurking in your local grocery store. So still using sort of fear, misunderstanding to control the way that we approach women. And in 2013, the Geneva Declaration on Femicide said, misogyny is entrenched in every part of the world. It is a reality for most women. And while there are laws and policies in place that aim to eliminate forms of discrimination against women, there is a lack of preventive action to ensure the safety of women around the world. And in my experience, a lot of women are kind of controlling their own behavior in order to not participate more fully in their lives. And here's an example in Guatemala, 2020, where a medic was burned alive after being accused of witchcraft. So we really need to interrogate and integrate this shadow side of this history, I think, in order to prevent it from continuing. Brings us back to Sir Francis Bacon and science. And in my experience, the scientific supremacy creates an imbalanced way of viewing the world through a very hyper-rational and utilitarian kind of viewpoint. So I wanted to uplift some ancient wisdom traditions. These are all medicine wheels or medicine frameworks that come from different parts of the world. The yin yang is the one that I have the deepest experience with. Some of my herbalism training is through Chinese philosophy. And the yin yang is a really elegant description of balance from the Tao. The Lemniscate, which has a similar idea of past, present, future, as well as masculine, feminine, hot tones, is from the shamanic tradition of the Melissay from the Celtic Isles, which has survived through the practice of peacekeeping and is still practiced today. The practice of hoodoo or Yorubic medicine from West Africa and the West African diaspora. The quote that Whitney shared about voodoo, that is a disparaging term that comes from the Hindu word for spirit, which is Voldu, which is a hugely elegant and very relevant contemporary medicine tradition as well as the ancient one. And to bring something from the European and Christian tradition, the story of the Holy Grail is actually the story of the feminine principle and the search for that feminine principle. And the sacred marriage, the merging of masculine and feminine, is a story of wholeness. We've kind of forgotten that. This is from Peggy Ayers, and I really appreciate the work she's done about kind of reintegrating ancestral thinking or more indigenous thinking. Of course, these binary frameworks are kind of an oversimplification, but it starts to build a framework towards wholeness and a way of approaching things from a more whole way. So in my classes, I encourage my students to experiment with engaging with the plants, not necessarily in this very scientific research perspective, but practicing deep listening and embodiment and using the senses and maybe introducing the ideas of animacy and that these plants have something to communicate with them through dreams or through arts or through other ways of knowing. So the idea of non-dualistic, holistic thinking, actions over words, relying on the heart, the intuition, and the intelligence of the senses. So we're going to invite you into a little bit of reflection yourselves, and thank you for hearing all of that. Let's take about 15 to 20 minutes to give you all time to get up and move around, because we realized not only was that a lot of information, it was also emotionally laden information. But in your handouts, there's a reflection question for you to kind of look on your own. And I don't have a handout anymore because I gave them all out. Thank you.
So it's question number 2. And you'll see it says, reflect on ways that you might reclaim and access the feminine or the yin qualities in your personal and professional life and create brave spaces for your patients and colleagues to do the same. So what are some of the ways that you might bring more feminine nurturing energy or yin to different parts of your life?
Yeah, and there's a little bit of background here of yin and yang, and then on the back side, a little bit tiny, there's this framework from Peggy Ayers, which might help you kind of get your head and heart around what we're talking about as far as the yin and more feminine ways of knowing. So let's take 15 or 20 minutes. You can do a little bit of individual reflecting and then have conversations with each other, and then we'll do a little bit of group sharing after we take.
And feel free, if you haven't had tea, if you'd like to get up and make some. Also take note of this incredible art that's around us. All the beautiful women. I don't know when this went up, but it's perfect.
It's been.
There you go.
Oh my God. However, if you're about that. Okay. I want to do it, but there's not one. Later, I told you, I like heard about it. Yeah, but that's, yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah, so. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yes. It's not as performing that. Great. Okay, yeah. Yeah. So this is yes, you need to try. It's very then. So it's yeah, and then it's there's other ones that are
That's exactly. I can. I'm gonna do the next area. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm so glad that our previous words have stimulated conversation, but also connection. Connection is good for regulating our nervous systems. And before we hear some examples from all of you, I just want to acknowledge Kate is modeling, bringing more feminine into the workplace by using a pink metallic pen on the email sign up sheet. Thank you. And I'm going to pass this around if you'd like to be added to the Osher Center email list to hear about it. For attendance. Yes. And also,
Yes. Yeah.
if you don't want to be added to the email list, just say it on the sheet.
Yeah.
So take a moment, settle back in. Well, pause. So we would love to just hear about what came up for you in the reflection, maybe some or any themes in response to question number 2. And we can do this popcorn style. People can just spontaneously share anyone else.
My name's Clem. Nice to meet all of you. I first thought about this when you put up on the screen, it's a slide that was like, witchcraft is in your local grocery store, watch out. And it made me think about the rise of like crystals and astrology being more like maybe like a Gen Z thing, or posting videos about it. And I feel like it was totally kind of like turned around as like a negative thing, or like annoying when girls will like share their crystals or talk about astrology, which totally makes sense given our theme of like misogyny or trying to like masculinize yourself, which I also feel like I went through of like, okay, I'm gonna wear like baggy clothes, that's cooler, and like but I think that for me, like bringing in feminine, I got more into this last year, but just thinking about the moon cycles as times to reflect. And I mean, I haven't had much of a connection with crystals, I haven't gotten into that. But when it comes to astrology and the moon, I really feel a connection to take time and reflect on how I'm doing. And I think it goes to show that I think that's a more common, like women are doing that more, that it shows that we are willing to open up and be emotional and think about like what we're doing, not just like blindly go through life. That's a big like general statement that all women do that. I know not all women do that, but I made me think about that and how it doesn't need to be an annoying thing or something to cover up. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to share from my perspective of living in Burlington for 20 years, I went from seeing 1 or 2 moon circles to seeing more than I can keep track of. And the other powerful thing about moon circles, besides connecting with natural rhythms and our body's rhythms, is it's about trusting other women. You know, this is huge healing. So thank you for bringing that in. Other reflections? This question. So much we can learn and be inspired by each other.
I'd like to mention that, I don't know, I mean, some of the questions, thank you very much. There was one, maybe it was one. It's too sad that it's short. So many things. But, I mean, I couldn't help and we were meditating and all through the presentation and then to think about 2 things that were embracing me all the time. One has to do a lot with the maternity, with the fact that there is this irrational complexity, especially in front of a midwife. I had midwife in both my pregnancies. I had this special feeling because a big portion of why we're punished by the male historically is exactly because we are the ones that have the possibility to create another exactly like us. And I remember my advisor when I was a grad student, I got pregnant. And I mean, everybody, of course, in academia tells you, why you did it, and it's a punishment to have that. And so I thought to myself, I had to finish very soon. I don't care anymore about the dissertation. The only thing I want is to enjoy my pregnancy. So I decided to, I mean, I had like 8 goals, objective. And I said, I'm going to do just 2. Forget about everything else. I just want to enjoy my pregnancy because it's absolutely magic. It's this irrational thing that takes over you and you start to see colors and I mean, I finish that scene and everybody's no better. It's not better. I couldn't even imagine. It's that scene that is a lot of the witchcraft is exactly related to this power of maternity, being able to bring to the world, I mean, this wisdom that it comes with this. It's still punished for the kind of thing. I mean, it's running. It's very difficult to put it, especially you can see I'm a foreigner, but in a country like this, for me, it honestly blow my mind. I mean, we Latins are always accused of machista and everything, but there is a lot of machismo in this country. Why a woman has to make less money? And they punish you because you're gonna have a baby, then we have to give you less money for. And it's institutional. So sorry, that's the point. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
another thing is like the role of the healers in indigenous communities. That it has like this power, I mean, it's something different. It's just still very enacted. And of course, they are persecuted, they are punished with everything, they are at the bottom of many things, but many times not inside of the communities. Go to these isolated communities, the woman healers are central, are still emotionally the pinnacle of the society and understanding these wonderful layers of connection that are related to this wisdom. This wisdom has been passed along for literally thousands of years. This is still there.
I think doing the work to sort of integrate and understand this history and these false narratives helps us to appreciate and, you know, be in solidarity with the preservation of those important practices. And love what you said about the magic. Part of what was coming through for me is fierceness. Like I have this like fierce like protection of beauty and life, which is about like individual healing, but also collective healing. And it wasn't until later in life I was like, oh yeah, that's like fundamental to being witch, right? So I have to reconcile that now. But yeah, thank you for bringing.
I'm gonna say something. It's confidential.
It is recorded. Should we stop recording?
No.
Why
okay.
don't we stop recording during the check-in part? I think that feels.
I would love to run into later to like maybe because I know that there's lots of people spaces and so yeah. Okay, no, it's fine. So I am a physician and also a healthcare leader. And I had one of my teachers recently said to me, "You're like ex machina." And I never knew what that was. And she goes, "God in the machine." What is that? And I still don't really like read much about it, but the concept of, for me, kind of, I'm a very spiritual person. So I'm seeing as God, as divine, the feminine, the connector, the nurturer, right? And some people know in this room that I've been in some leadership positions that have been very challenging. So the way that I have tried to achieve some softness, some more femininity, has been to say no to decline some certain leadership positions, which for me has been difficult and hard, I think, because I feel that sense of guilt for almost abandoning the place where I can be a nurturing leader. And so it's been really difficult. I still find myself in leadership spaces, still very hard. And so it's almost a daily, almost hourly balance. And I'm not in a suit today, but I'm normally in a suit here at the Osher Center when I flow in for meetings. And this is like a safe space for me because it's so nurturing just to be in this physical space. So yeah. And it's and so I do all the things, right? I try to do a lot of self-care, but in the one-to-one with patients, I think what I'm trying to do with this exercise is just really, even with the stress of just direct patient care, is really have more a meditative type of practice where it's like I just try to take up one breath before I enter a room and really recenter no matter what's happening in the world, country, happened the hour before, and just realize that that person is there for our relationship, for us together in that moment. And so that softness is me trying to recenter and have a bit of meditative practice where I just try to be present to that current moment. And maybe that's that ex machina, that God. And it's been hard. But I think will perhaps have a bit of that in whatever we do. It's a really difficult time. So about overshare. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, and that resonates so deeply with me as a fellow healthcare provider, and just the stress of the work in front of you. And yes, I have the same practice where I take a deep breath before I enter a space and practice really, or try to practice really deep presence and listen. And even like the way that I sit, making sure I'm lower than eye level than the person I'm caring for, or at eye level, and my posture, not being consumed by a computer, and really being present. And it is hard. Some days it's a lot harder than other days. But I think that's it. Like just finding these moments for me, and then model that for other people.
There's also huge wisdom in the deep breath. If we just frame it in this framework, I think of the yin yang as reflections of the autonomic nervous system, and the yang being the sympathetic, like go get it side of the nervous system, and the yin being the rest, digest, integrate, restore. And when we take a deep breath, we're automatically turning on the parasympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system is where we heal. So if we are overstimulated, then we're not able to really participate healing in a lot of ways. And the other thing that came up for me with your sharing is I think a lot in leadership or just like moving through professional settings, like the way I used to want to just like break down closed doors and realized at some point I was gonna be exhausted if I was always breaking down closed doors. So finding the open doors are the ones that you can nudge open. It's a much more walking way to move the obstacles that you encounter. It's also quite in. So yeah. Some wisdom there.
And just thinking about the historical erasure of male healers. Women were not allowed to go to medical school for a very long time. I think there's much to be said just to be a woman in the healthcare space or position. So.
And I really hope that these will be seeds to continue the conversations and create just more safety and trust among many of us that work together. Continue to support each other in this work. We have a few more slides before closing, and then I think there will be some more time for informal conversation. Does anybody have any burning sharing stuff?
I just want to say one thing that I can't help. There's like major significance and it just clicked for me. But Laura Mann started the nonprofit that was sort of the start of all that's happening now. And she was a home birth midwife. And I just didn't really put that together until tonight about what she birthed and where we are today. There is so many of her wisdom that I didn't even honestly realize.
I want a legacy.
She is. She was, I think, the first home birth nurse.
Yeah, so I think part of the journey or the way I've approached the journey is, doing the work in my own lineage so that I can show up for all the other expressions of healing and wholeness and health that exist out there. I want to share this piece from Dr. Lila June Johnstone, who's one of my favorite Indigenous scholars, and she also has European ancestry. So she does beautiful writing about integrating her European ancestry as an Indigenous person. And she says, I have read of the excavation of clay figurines of women found in German soil, said to represent the sanctity of the feminine and the sanctity of the earth, only to find that these figurines were radiocarbon dated to be 40,000 years old. This is how long Indigenous Europeans were honoring women and honoring the earth before the onslaught that most of us know as, quote, European history. These are the goddess cultures that were slaughtered as witches in the name of fear manifested as patriarchy. I know there is beauty beneath the violence and brutality of the Indigenous European experience. The 2,000 years of open warfare that gave rise to mentalities of scarcity, competition, and hierarchy. It is time for us all to heal and heal deeply so that the healing may ripple outward across space and time. Let's heal the source. It will help heal the whole. Wonderful prayer. I also wanted to share this amazing quantum physics thing. We're talking about science, but also the sort of edges and frontiers of science. This is an image produced by entangled photons or pieces of light at the, not even microscopic level, at the photonic and electron and neutron level. And it demonstrates the balance of yin yang. So this is the fundamental nature of life, polarity and relationship between what seems to be opposing forces. And a reminder that yin yang is not an expression of dualism, and it's an expression of wholeness.
That is actually happening on the sun.
On the face of the sun.
If you look at like a solar image, there's a yin yang.
Oh, wow.
Well, the sun.
Thank you for sharing that, because we've been talking about the moon so much with the eclipse, but of course there was the came together this morning. Yeah. So, and we're not lost here. I want to bring us back to the ancient wisdom tradition of Chinese medicine, which is one of my comfort zones. There may be other diagnoses and healing prognoses to put forward. But the way that Chinese medicine would diagnose this cultural imbalance or disease is yin deficiency. And the important thing to say here is that we don't need to suppress yang. There isn't too much yang. There's too little yin to contain the yang and direct it in healthy ways. So the translation is actually we need to reintegrate and nurture the feminine. Unfortunately, smashing the patriarchy is not actually that helpful. Sorry to disappoint for those of you that enjoy that. So reintegrating and nurturing the feminine, and another important tenet of Chinese medicine is the idea of the hologram. So if we change within ourselves, it ripples out and is reflected. That makes it feel like possible. One of my practices and work is this word rematriation. And I think it's important to name that if you type rematriation into a device like a smartphone, it auto-corrects to rematriation. This is how deep. And rematriation reflects these two pieces: efforts to restore sacred relationship between Indigenous peoples and ancestral land. This work that we need to do in supporting the land back movement all over the world, but also returning to a way of life that includes reverence for nature. I'm so grateful about the work in planetary health that the Osher Center is doing. And to me, nature reflects the nurturing and life-giving qualities of women and the feminine in all genders. So returning to this nurturing and nature connection is part of this. Closing with a poem.
So we're going, now that we're going to ground back down to form. Finish. So yin is about earth connection. So we're going to take a moment to feel those roots into the ground beneath you and keep growing and growing through the soil or the earth. So I'm going to read this poem, and in this poem you can think of the word God as the feeling of being held by something larger, what hums beneath everything, the pulse, the breath, the blood, the wound, intuition, the body, the force that decays and regenerates and transforms, your ancestors, or something unnamed. This is by Keelan Hopkins. The worst thing we ever did was put God in the sky, out of reach, pulling the divinity from the leaf, sifting out the holy from our bones, insisting God isn't bursting dazzlement through everything we've made, a hard commitment to see as ordinary, stripping the sacred from everywhere to put in a cloud man elsewhere, prying closeness from your heart. The worst thing we ever did was take the dance and the song out of prayer, made it sit up straight and cross its legs, removed it of rejoicing, wiped clean its hip sway, its questions, its ecstatic yowl, its tears. The worst thing we ever did is pretend God isn't the easiest thing in this universe, available to every soul in every breath. So you can take this rootedness with you as you go forth with a new and deeper connection to earth and you.
So as you go forth, and in the spirit of health coaching, I have a baby step suggestion for you all, and also a bigger vision. For this next one, especially for those who cycle or experience female hormones, Whitney and Aviva Ram, if you ever call hormonal, say this. Yes, you want to say the first one?
Yes, I have a built-in intelligence system that signals exactly what I need.
I am aware, intuitive, and deeply connected to my body's wisdom.
I feel deeply and respond to the world with passion.
I am strong and I am unwilling to be silent and express in these ways and also support others to do so. And the bigger vision comes from our neighbors across the lake, the Seneca people, the Haudenosaunee, who have this prophecy that when all people who bleed with the moon choose to offer their moon blood back to the earth, there will be world peace. So lots of significance in this. Honoring our bodies, honoring the earth, and making offerings back to the earth. Yeah. Thank you for being here tonight. Okay, we have a poem. So this is for you to read to someone who needs to hear it, which might be you, and if that's the case, read it out loud. Or maybe you need to read it to somebody in your circle. And beyond Whitney is too much. Right. So take care, everyone. I look forward to continuing the conversation, and we're here for another 5 to 10 minutes if you want to have. Thank you.
And there's tea, so if we run out of tea bags or filled bags in the kitchen, you can feel free to come and take a scoop and put it in a bag to bring home. It's rose, theme of the night, and milky oats and tulsi, which are great for the immune system, and tulsi basil.
I just want to say thank you to Kate and Rita who had to leave for doing all the organizing.
Yeah.
Kara has to do.
And of course, the last minute.
Thank you.
No, no.